The heavy air of the forgotten Aelid ruin clung to the scholar's robes as their trembling fingers traced the cracked binding of a tome that should not exist. The moment the cover creaked open, a voice that was not a voice slithered through their mind, whispers of realms beyond mortal comprehension, of beings who danced between the threads of fate like spiders in a cosmic web. This was no ordinary book. It spoke of the Daedric Princes, not as distant gods of myth, but as architects of hidden worlds, each with schemes so vast they could warp the very fabric of Nirn. To read further was to risk losing oneself in truths too terrible to bear. Yet, to close the book now, that would mean surrendering to ignorance, to a world where unseen hands pulled the strings of destiny. The scholar hesitated, but only for a moment, because some secrets refuse to stay buried, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The first passage of the cursed tome shimmered like ink, floating on water, its letters shifting, writhing alive before the scholar's eyes. A sickly green glow pulsed from the pages, and suddenly, the ruins around them dissolved into swirling mist. Solid ground gave way to floating islands of blackened books, stretching into an impossible horizon under a starless, bruised sky. The air itself hummed with whispered secrets, half-formed sentences, half-remembered truths, all slithering into the mind like serpents. This was Apocrypha, the ever-shifting realm of Hermaeus Mora, where knowledge came at the price of madness. Tendrils of ink coiled around the scholar's ankles, dragging them deeper into the labyrinth. Towering shelves groaned under the weight of forbidden texts, each one whispering promises of power, if only they dared to read further. Something moved in the periphery, a shape of too many eyes, too many mouths, murmuring secrets that made their skull ache. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to shut the book and flee. But the lure of understanding was too strong. What was one more page, one more truth? Then, just as the whispers threatened to swallow them whole, the vision shattered. The scholar gasped, gripping the edges of the tome, as if it might dissolve between their fingers. The ruins were silent again, but one name burned in their mind, seared there as if by an unseen hand: Azura. Why her? What connection could the Prince of Dusk and Dawn have with this place? The book had shown them a fragment of something vast, an invitation or a warning. Either way, there was no going back now. The path ahead shimmered with danger, and something far worse than death awaited those who sought the Daedric Princes' secrets unprepared. The scholar's boots crunched over brittle volcanic rock as they climbed the windswept slopes of Mount Anther, where the last fragments of ancient Aelid prophecy had led them. The air tasted of frost and something sharper, like the promise of revelation or ruin. At the summit, half buried in snowdrifts, stood Azura's shrine, a crescent moon of obsidian, its edges catching the dying light in glints of violet and gold. Even untouched, the stone hummed with energy, as if whispering directly to the marrow of their bones. This was no place for the uncertain. A gust of wind scattered the snow at their feet, revealing glyphs carved into the rock, words in a language that predated mortal kingdoms. As the scholar hesitated, tracing the symbols with numb fingers, the mist before the shrine thickened, curling into shapes that danced just beyond comprehension. Then, in a voice like twilight-given sound, Azura spoke, not with thunder or flame, but with the quiet certainty of a tide pulling sand from shore. You seek truth, the prince murmured, her form flickering between woman and constellation. But truth is a mirror. It shows only what you are prepared to see. Will you kneel, little seeker, or will you turn away, clutching your doubts like armor? The offer hung in the air, heavier than the mountain's silence. Devotion to Azura meant visions, glimpses of futures both glorious and grim, but also chains of a different kind. Her followers spoke of clarity, yet their eyes always held a distant gleam, as if part of them lingered forever in Moonshadow, her realm of twilight paradoxes. To refuse, though, that meant walking blind into a game where the other players were gods. The scholar's breath fogged in the cold as they weighed the cost. Some secrets demanded sacrifice, but was it wisdom to trade one master for another? The shrine's glow deepened, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them, not with menace, but with the patience of something that had waited for mortals long before this one, and would wait long after. A choice pressed against their ribs like a knife's edge. Step forward into the unknown, or back into a world that might never make sense again. And then, just as the first star pierced the indigo sky, the moment broke. Whether by whisper or will, the decision was made. The path ahead would not be kind. But then, neither were the answers they sought. The air in the hollow realm tasted like rust and old laughter, metallic, mocking, clinging to the back of the scholar's throat as they stepped through the twisted archway. Here, the sky was a sickly yellow, stretched too thin over hills that bent unnaturally, as if the land itself was grinning. At the center of it all lounged Clavicus Vile, perched on a throne of broken promises, his smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Ah, another seeker," he crooned, twirling a dagger of blackened bone between his fingers. "You look like someone who'd trade a kidney for a straight answer." "Lucky for you, I'm feeling generous today." The offer came wrapped in silk and poison, a sliver of truth, plucked fresh from the void, in exchange for the scholar's voice. No whispers, no screams, just silence, forever. Clavicus leaned forward, eyes glittering like coins in a wishing well. "Think of all the things you won't have to say." No more apologies, no more lies, just pure, unfiltered knowledge. Fair, isn't it? But before the scholar could answer, a low growl vibrated through the ground. Barbas, the mangy, half-demon hound, limped into view, his milky eyes locked on his master. "He'll gut the deal the second you take it," the dog muttered, voice gravel and smoke. "Vile's truths come with hooks, you'll get your answer, sure, but he'll yank it back through your ribs when you least expect it." For a heartbeat, the realm went still. Even the wind held its breath. Clavicus' smile didn't waver, but something colder flickered behind it. The scholar's fingers twitched toward their throat, imagining the hollowness there. No more words, no more questions. Just answers at a price that might hollow out more than their voice. No, the word was quieter than they'd meant, but it echoed like a slap. Clavicus threw back his head and laughed, the sound like shattering glass. "Oh, I do love it when they refuse. Makes the next offer so much sweeter." With a flick of his wrist, the throne dissolved, and the scholar stumbled back into their own world, but not unchanged. A single, blood-red thread now coiled around their wrist, pulsing faintly. No contract had been signed, but Clavicus never truly let go. Some bargains, it seemed, were simply postponed. And somewhere in the hollow realm, a dog sighed, knowing the game was far from over. The mark itched. The scholar rubbed at it absently, already weighing their next move. Because if one thing was certain, it was this. In the dance with Daedric Princes, even refusal was a step in their choreography. The flickering torchlight of Riffin's underbelly cast jagged shadows across the scholar's face as they slipped through the damp, moss-slick tunnels beneath the city. The air reeked of stagnant water and spilled secrets fitting, considering their quarry. Whispers had led them here, to the Thieves Guild's most guarded vault, where rumor claimed Nocturnal's skeleton key lay hidden. Not a key of metal, but a fragment of the Prince of Shadow's own power, said to unlock anything doors, mines, even fate itself. Ahead, the guild's lookout leaned against a crumbling arch, humming a tune that set the scholar's teeth on edge. Every thief in the Ratway knew the stories, how Nocturnal's favor turned locks into mist and walls into smoke, how her champions vanished into the dark without a trace. But the guild didn't hoard the key out of reverence. They feared it, and fear made even the slickest cut purses reckless. The scholar's fingers brushed the lockpick in their sleeve. Negotiation was a gamble with criminals, but theft was a language the guild understood too well. One twist of the wrist, a whispered prayer to any god, listening, then the lock clicked open. Silence, then a voice like oiled silk sliced through the dark. "You've got nerve, stranger." The Guildmaster stepped into the flickering light, her dagger catching the torch's glow. Most who come for the key leave with their throats slit. But you're different. Let's talk price. Too easy. The scholar tensed. Guilds like this didn't bargain unless the deal was rigged. Still, they played along. Name your terms. The Guildmaster's smile didn't reach her eyes. A trade, the key for your firstborn's luck. A chill coiled down the scholar's spine. Nocturnal's bargains were subtler than Clavicus Vile's, but no less cruel. To surrender luck was to surrender choice. To walk forever under a sky where every coin fell tails up. The scholar's hand drifted toward their belt. "Counteroffer," they said, and flung a smoke bomb at the Guildmaster's feet. Chaos erupted. Guild thieves lunged from the shadows, blades flashing, but the scholar was already moving, sprinting deeper into the sewer's labyrinth. Behind them, the Guildmaster's laughter echoed like a death knell. "Run, little mouse. The shadows here bite back." And then the tunnels shifted. Walls stretched unnaturally, corridors folding in on themselves like a nightmare. Nocturnal's realm bled into the mortal world, twisting the very stone. The scholar's breath came in ragged gasps as they dodged grasping hands, not just thieves now, but things with too many teeth, slithering from cracks that hadn't been there a moment ago. A dead end. The scholar whirled, heart hammering, as the Guildmaster sauntered closer. "You should have taken the deal." She raised her dagger and froze. A crow's cry split the air, sharp as a blade. The torchlight guttered, and when it flared back to life, the Guildmaster was gone. Only a single black feather drifted to the wet stone. The scholar didn't wait to question their luck. They ran, the key's weight burning in their pocket like a stolen ember, because one truth rang clearer than the rest. Nocturnal didn't lose her treasures. She let them be taken, and that meant this game was far from over. The sewers might have spit them back into the night, but the scholar couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching from the dark, waiting to see just how far a mortal would go for a taste of Shadow's power. The scent of damp pine and iron filled the scholar's lungs as they crept through the moonlit thicket, every snapped twig beneath their boots a potential death sentence. They had come seeking answers, rumors of a hidden cult that worshipped Hircine, the Daedric Prince of the Hunt, through blood and beast shape. But the woods of Falkreath held more than whispers. Something was stalking them, not with the clumsy pursuit of men, but with the patient, calculated tread of predators toying with prey. A guttural snarl tore through the silence. The scholar spun just in time to see a halting figure emerge from the trees, not a man, not quite a wolf, but something caught between. The werewolf's golden eyes gleamed with an intelligence far older than mortal hunger. Around it, shadows shifted, revealing more shapes, more glowing gazes. They were surrounded. Hircine's hunt had begun. The rules were simple: run or fight. Survive until dawn, or become another trophy in the prince's endless game. The scholar's fingers tightened around their dagger, too small, too mortal, as the pack leader lunged. Instinct took over. A dodge, a slash, a spray of hot blood across the leaves. The beast howled, staggering back with a gash across its muzzle. For a breath, the hunt hesitated. Then the wounded werewolf collapsed, its form shuddering back into the shape of a young man, barely more than a boy. His chest heaved, his fingers clutching at the dirt like a drowning man grasping for shore. The scholar's blade hovered at his throat. Mercy or madness? The scholar lowered the dagger. Run, they muttered. The boy's eyes widened not with gratitude, but something closer to pity. Then he vanished into the undergrowth. A mistake. The forest inhaled. The wind died. Even the insects fell silent. Then, from the darkness, Hircine's laughter rolled like thunder. A hunter who hesitates is already gutted. The trees themselves seem to twist, branches knitting into walls, roots rising like snares. The air thickened with the musk of wet fur and hot breath as the pack closed in not just the cult now, but spectral hounds with eyes like embers, their forms woven from shadow and moonlight. The scholar sprinted, lungs burning, but the path ahead warped, trees bending to block their escape. They had broken the hunt's oldest law: prey does not spare the predator. And Hircine's punishment was cruel in its simplicity. The woods would hunt them now. Every leaf, every thorn, every whisper of wind turned traitor. Dawn was hours away. And the scholar was no longer the hunter, nor even the hunted. They were the prize. The ground trembled beneath the scholar's feet as jagged peaks of rust-colored stone clawed at the sky, their edges sharp as broken teeth. This was the Valley of the Strong, a place where the air smelled of sulfur and spilled blood, where the weak didn't last long enough to leave bones. Before them stood Garzgró Malag, an orc warlord whose armor was forged from the hulls of shattered enemy ships, his tusks etched with the runes of countless victories. His grin was a challenge in itself. Malacath watches, he growled, hefting a jagged mace whose spikes still clung to flecks of old gore. Fight with honor, or flee with shame. Either way, the pariah god will judge. The rules were simple: no magic, no tricks, just steel and sinew. To refuse was to spit in the face of the Daedric Prince, of the ostracized, and Malacath had a long memory for insults. The scholar gripped their blade, knuckles white. They weren't here to win, they were here to endure. Garz moved like a rock slide, his mace descending with a force that cracked the earth where the scholar had stood a heartbeat before. Dust stung their eyes as they rolled aside, ribs screaming from the near miss. The warlord laughed, a sound like boulders grinding together. Good, fear keeps you sharp. Blow after blow, the scholar danced on the edge of death, parrying, dodging, but never striking to kill. It wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. Malacath's trials weren't about skill alone, they were about defiance. To stand unbowed when the world demanded you break. A backhanded swing sent the scholar sprawling, their swords skittering across the stone. Guards loomed over them, mace raised for the final strike. Last chance, little scholar, beg for mercy. They spat blood at his feet instead. The warlord paused. Then, to the shock of the watching orcs, he lowered his weapon. Ah, you've got teeth after all. He reached down, hauling the scholar upright with a grip that could crush bone. Malacath favors the stubborn. From the smoking fissures of the valley, a blade emerged. A crude, brutal axe, its edge perpetually stained as if fresh from the forge. Garz pressed it into the scholar's hands. The prince's gift. It'll serve you well or eat you alive. The moment flesh met metal, a fire ignited in the scholar's veins. The axe hungered, whispering of battles yet to come, of enemies waiting to be sundered. Malacath's respect was a double-edged blessing. Survival today, but a weapon that would never let them walk away from war. As the warlord vanished into the ashen mist, the scholar stared at their reflection in the axe's pitted surface. Their eyes gleamed a little too brightly, their pulse a little too eager. The trial was over, but the curse had only just begun. The grand hall of the nobleman's estate glittered with deceptive opulence, gilded mirrors reflecting false smiles. Wine as deep and dark as the secrets swirling beneath every toast. Lord Villanis had welcomed the scholar with open arms, his charm as polished as the silver goblets his servants carried. But something lurked behind his too perfect courtesy, a flicker of amusement, like a spider watching a fly stumble toward its web. You must be weary from your travels, Villanis murmured, pressing a glass into the scholar's hand. Rest here, my home is yours. His fingers lingered a heartbeat too long on their wrist, cold despite the hearth's warmth. The offer was tempting: shelter, alliances, access to his legendary library. But the scholar had read enough of Mephala's lore to recognize a silken trap when they saw one. The Prince of Lies thrived in half-truths and whispered betrayals. To refuse Villanis outright would brand them an enemy before his entire court, a death sentence wrapped in velvet. Yet to trust him was to sign away their will, one honeyed word at a time. So the scholar played the game, mirroring his smiles, laughing at his jests, all while counting every exit and memorizing every flicker of unease in the servant's eyes. That night, alone in their borrowed chambers, the scholar pried a loose floorboard free and found a blood-stained letter, a confession from Villanis' last guest, scribbled in frantic script before the ink ran dry. He isn't human, it read. He spins threads from our throats. Don't drink the rest was torn away. Dawn brought a summons to the courtyard, where Villanis waited beside a grinning executioner. A small disagreement among my courtiers, he sighed, as if discussing the weather. But you're a scholar of truth, aren't you? Perhaps you'd care to mediate. The condemned man, a rival lord, was gagged, his eyes wide with terror. Villanis' smile never wavered. Choose, pardon him and earn my displeasure. or condemn him and stain your conscience. Either way, the web tightens. The scholar hesitated. Mephala's trials weren't about right or wrong. They were about entanglement. Every choice, every compromise, was another thread binding them to her design. So they did the unexpected. They knelt to the condemned lord and whispered, "Play dead when the blade falls." Then, loud enough for the court to hear, "Justice is yours to wield, Lord Valanis." The executioner's axe flashed. The noble crumpled. The court erupted in applause, all but Valanis, whose polished mask cracked for the first time, because the scholar had woven a lie of their own, and the corpse at their feet still breathed faintly beneath his cloak. A low chuckle slithered through the scholar's mind. Mephala's voice, velvet and venom. "Clever little moth, but did you truly think you could outspin the weaver?" The courtyard dissolved into shadows, the nobleman's form unraveling like smoke, leaving only a single black thread coiled around the scholar's finger. The game wasn't over. It had barely begun, and somewhere in the twisting skeins of fate, Mephala was already choosing their next opponent. The air in the village clung thick and green, a miasma that stung the eyes and coated the tongue with the taste of rotting copper. Buildings slumped like feverish bodies, their wooden beams weeping blackened sap. This wasn't just sickness, it was design, Peryite's handiwork. The Daedric Prince of Pestilence didn't deal in chaos, but in a terrible, meticulous order. Bodies breaking down in precise, predictable stages, plagues spreading in perfect geometric patterns. A figure emerged from the haze, his hooded robes sewn with symbols that hurt to look at angles too sharp, curves too tight. The taskmaster's voice crackled like burning parchment. "You seek the cure." He extended a vial of viscous yellow liquid. "Spread 3 drops to the next village. Reward yourself with salvation." The bargain was pure Peryite, and forced the cycle of suffering to escape it. The scholar's hands itched to take the vial. Their own skin had begun to prickle with unnatural heat, veins darkening beneath the surface like creeping roots. But they'd seen the aftermath of such gifts. Entire towns reduced to twitching, groaning husks, their agony orchestrated like some grotesque symphony. "No," the word rasped from their tightening throat. The taskmaster tilted his head, amused, then wrought nobly. He vanished, leaving the scholar coughing blood onto the blighted soil. Time bent strangely in Peryite's domain. Minutes stretched into hours as the scholar scoured abandoned apothecary shelves, their vision swimming with hallucinations of scuttling insects beneath their skin. The infected found them soon enough, not mindless beasts, but villagers trapped in lucid torment, their bodies warping while their minds remained cruelly intact. One, a child with fingers fused into gnarled claws, whimpered as she lunged. "Kill me before I spread it further." The antidote, if it existed, lay in the heart of the plague's origin, a corrupted shrine deep in the village well. Lowering themselves into the damp darkness, the scholar fought against shuddering muscles and the insidious whisper of surrender. Peryite's order was a lie. True balance didn't demand endless suffering. It demanded breaking the cycle. At the shrine's base, amid pulsating fungal growths, gleamed a single silver flower, its petals uncorrupted, its roots drinking the filth without succumbing. The scholar wrenched it free, their fingertips blistering at the touch. As the first drop of its nectar hit their tongue, the fever's grip faltered, not a cure. A bargain of their own making. Above ground, the taskmaster watched from the shadows, his disapproval a tangible pressure. Peryite would remember this defiance. But for now, the scholar staggered into the sunlight, clutching the flower like a stolen secret. They hadn't saved the village, but they'd proven something far more dangerous. Even in the prince's perfect system, choice was the one variable that refused to obey. The next town would be waiting, and this time they'd arrive with more than hope. They'd arrive prepared. The cobblestones beneath the scholar's boots began to ripple like water, the very streets of the imperial city twisting upward into impossible spirals. Fountains gurgled purple wine, and the faces of passers-by melted like candle wax, reforming with too many eyes or mouths where they shouldn't be. At the center of it all, perched atop a floating cheese wheel, sat Sheogorath, the Prince of Madness, grinning like a child who just set fire to the world's largest library. Aha, another brave fool stumbling into my parlor. He twirled a cane topped with a screaming daisy, his mismatched eyes, one gold, one void black, locking onto the scholar. Let's make it interesting. Hey, answer me this. What's the weight of a sigh? The color of envy, the sound of Tuesday. He leaned in, breath reeking of spoiled jam. Get it right, and I'll grant you a boon. Get it wrong, and you'll jig till your kneecaps sing opera. The riddle was nonsense, of course. That was the point. Sheogorath's games weren't meant to be won. They were meant to be played. So the scholar leaned into the absurdity, replying without hesitation. A sigh weighs nothing until it's yours. Envy is whatever color you're not wearing, and Tuesday sounds like a spoon dropped in an empty cathedral. Silence. Then Sheogorath exploded into laughter, so violent it shook loose a rain of live frogs from the sky. Brilliant, magnificent, utterly deranged, he wiped a tear from his cheek, which promptly turned into a tiny winged homunculus and flew away. You've earned a prize, my delightfully unhinged guest. With a snap of his fingers, the world lurched sideways. Suddenly, the scholar could taste colors. Blue was sharp like mint, red burned like cinnamon. Their left hand felt 5 minutes older than their right. Clouds whispered punchlines in a language made of hiccups and harp strings. Sheogorath's gift wasn't power or knowledge, it was perspective. A crack in the lens through which they viewed reality. Enjoy the view, the prince cackled as the vision began to fade. And do send my regards to the next poor sod, who thinks they understand how the world works. The scholar blinked and found themselves back in the imperial city, ordinary and unaltered, or so it seemed, because now, when they squinted at the setting sun, they could have sworn it winked back. Madness, it turned out, wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation, and Sheogorath had just handed them the key. The sky above the forgotten temple split, open like an overripe fruit, spilling rays of liquid gold onto the moss-cracked stones. Meridia's voice wasn't heard. It was felt, vibrating in the scholar's teeth like the hum of a plucked bowstring. Mortal, it thrummed. You who walk the edge of shadow and light, prove your worth. Cleanse this place. Before them, the shrine pulsed like a diseased heart, its marble veins blackened with creeping tendrils of some unknown corruption. The air smelled of burnt sugar and old blood. Meridia's light was no gentle glow. It was a scalpel, promising to carve away every impurity, every weakness. The scholar's fingers hovered over the shrine's surface, hesitating. They'd heard the stories, how her radiance could scour a soul clean, leaving only devotion behind. No lies, no secrets, but no self either. Then came the first searing touch. Light lanced through their palms, scouring the shrine's filth, and with it, fragments of their own mind. A childhood memory dissolved like ink in water, their mother's hands shaping bread dough, the scent of yeast and hearth smoke. Gone, the scholar recoiled, clutching their skull as another wave of light crested. Stop, Meridia's presence sharpened, the temple itself seeming to lean inward. You cling to rot, the prince hissed. These trinkets of the past are weights dragging you into darkness. But the scholar had bargained with enough Daedra to know the cost of purity. They curled inward, shielding one last memory, a stolen moment before their studies began, laughing with a friend now lost to time. The light raged against their defiance, blistering skin, yet the core of that memory held fast. A terrible stillness followed. The shrine gleamed pristine, but Meridia's voice dripped with icy displeasure. You are flawed, but flaws can be remade. The light vanished, leaving the scholar gasping on the temple steps. Their hands shook, their mind full of holes where moments once lived. Yet in the quiet dark, a single ember of rebellion still burned. They'd paid Meridia's price, but not all of it, and that, perhaps, was victory enough. For now, the stone altar reeked of iron and old fear, its surface etched with grooves where countless victims had clawed for escape. Torchlight flickered against the leering faces of Malag Bal's cultists, their eyes hollow, their smiles too wide. The scholar's back pressed against the cold temple wall as the circle tightened. No weapons, no escape, only the slow, relentless chant of the sacrificial oath. The high priest's voice slithered through the dark. Kneel or be broken. Malag Bal's presence coiled through the chamber like smoke, heavy with the promise of dominion. His wasn't the seduction of whispered lies or half-truths. It was the crushing weight of inevitability. Defiance is fleeting, the Prince of Domination mused, his voice a blade dragged along the spine. But swear yourself to me, and you'll wear your chains with pride. The scholar's pulse roared in their ears. To refuse meant a death that wouldn't stick. Malag Bal delighted in reviving rebels just to break them anew. Yet true submission that would hollow them out, leaving a puppet with their face. So they did the unthinkable, they knelt. The mark burned into their wrist like a brand, a searing spiral of blackened flesh. The cultists erupted into guttural cheers, but the scholar's gaze never wavered from the high priest's triumphant leer. Let them think they'd won, for now. Malag Bal's laughter echoed deep in their skull. Clever little liar, but every rebellion feeds my hunger. Struggle all you like, you'll still bend in the end. And then the whispers began. At first, they were easy to dismiss, a fleeting urges to snap at a beggar's wrist, to twist a friend's words into betrayal. But the more the scholar resisted, the louder the voice grew, warping their dreams into visions of rusted thrones and cities, choking on their own chains. The mark pulsed in time with their heartbeat, a constant reminder. The prince of slavery didn't need willing servants. He only needed time. Worse still, the cultists weren't just watching, they were waiting for the moment the scholar's resolve cracked, for the first flicker of cruelty in their eyes, because Malag Bal's greatest trick wasn't force. It was the slow rot of doubt, the gnawing suspicion that maybe, just maybe, surrender would finally make the whispers stop. The scholar gripped their dagger tighter. They'd bargained with Daedra before, but this was different. This wasn't a game of wits or a trial of strength. It was a war for their very will, and Malag Bal had eternity to win. Somewhere in the gloom, a chain rattled. The sound followed them long after they fled the temple. The candles burned upside down, their wax defying gravity as it dripped upward in shimmering violet threads. Music thrummed through the gilded halls of Sanguine's palace, not from instruments, but from the guests themselves, their laughter harmonizing into a dizzying waltz. Every face was hidden behind masks of living silk, each one shifting expressions like water. The scholar barely remembered how they'd arrived. One moment, they'd been drinking with a charming stranger at a roadside inn. The next, the world had dissolved into this riot of color and song. A figure draped in grapevines and crushed velvet sidled up, pressing a goblet into their hand. To eternity, Sanguine crowed, his voice honeyed and razor sharp. The wine inside swirled like liquid rubies, its scent intoxicating even untouched. One sip, and the night never has to end. The offer was a trap wrapped in velvet. Every reveler here had once been mortal. Now they danced with frenzied joy, their eyes hollow with centuries of excess. The scholar's fingers trembled around the goblet. To refuse would insult the prince of debauchery. To drink, that would make them just another mask in his collection. Sanguine's grin widened as he clinked his glass against theirs. Oh, don't look so grim. Damnation's overrated. Here, we celebrate the fall. Around them, the party twisted. A noblewoman's pearls melted into champagne mid-sip. A bard's lute sprouted roses that sang in minor keys. The air itself was thick with temptation, not just wine, but promise. No consequences, no regrets, just the endless crescendo of pleasure. The scholar exhaled slowly, setting the goblet on a passing tray, carried by a faceless servant. I prefer my nights with a dawn attached. For a heartbeat, the music stuttered. Sanguine's mask slipped, revealing something ancient and ravenous beneath. Then the moment passed, and he threw back his head with a laugh. Suit yourself, but the party's just getting started. With a snap of his fingers, the walls dissolved into a new hall grander, wilder, the chandeliers now made of intertwined lovers frozen in ecstasy. Escape wouldn't come through force or guile. Sanguine's realm thrived on surrender, so the scholar did the unexpected. They danced, not to lose themselves, but to remember the rhythm of their own breath, the weight of their boots on marble, the stubborn pulse of a will still their own. The prince watched, amused, as they wove through the revelers. Running only tires you faster, he purred. Who's running? The scholar spun past him, toward a towering mirror at the hall's edge, one that reflected not their masked face, but the moonlit road outside the forgotten inn. A gamble, but Sanguine's power hinged on distraction, on the wanting. To step through meant rejecting his greatest trick, making guests forget they ever desired escape. The scholar met their own reflections, eyes clear, unclouded, and stepped forward. Glass shattered like ice. Cold night air slapped their cheeks as they stumbled onto the muddy roadside, the inn's hearthlight flickering ahead. Behind them, faint as a sigh, Sanguine's laughter followed. Till next time, little tempter. The goblet was still in their hand, empty now, or perhaps it always had been. The earth trembled beneath the scholars' boots as they stood at the mouth of Bothaya's Crimson Pass, a jagged ravine where the rocks gleamed like old blood under the setting sun. Behind them, a band of warriors shifted uneasily, their armor clinking with the tension of those who'd heard the whispers. Only one leaves the proving ground. The air smelled of hot iron and something darker, the metallic tang of inevitability. Bothaya's voice slithered from the shadows, not in words, but in the sudden, sickening clarity of purpose that gripped the scholar's mind. Prove your worth, it seemed to say. Lead them to glory or to the grave. The rules were simple, brutal, a trial of betrayal, where the weak were culled and the strong rose slick with the blood of their allies. But the scholar had spent too long among Daedra to play by their rules without twisting them. As they descended into the arena, a crater of blackened sand, littered with bones rusted to the color of dried roses, they whispered a plan to the youngest warrior, a shield sister who joined for honor, not slaughter. When the first horn blew, chaos erupted. Swords flashed, but the scholar's strike wasn't aimed at flesh. It severed the chains holding a crumbling ledge above. Rocks rained down, dividing the warriors, scattering the fight into confusion. In the dust and din, the mutiny unfolded as planned. The innocent fled, the bloodthirsty turned on each other, and the scholar stood untouched at the center, their hands clean. For a heartbeat, silence, then the sand moved. It coiled around their ankles like a serpent, dragging them to their knees as Bothaya's form materialized, a figure of molten armor and ember eyes, radiating disapproval. Cunning, the prince mocked, but mercy has no place in my domain. The ground split, revealing a pit where the escaped warriors now huddled, trapped. Finish the trial, kill one by your own hand, or be their executioner through inaction. The choice is yours. The scholar's breath came in ragged gasps. There was no third option, no clever loophole, only sacrifice. Their gaze locked on their shield sister, who nodded once, her face pale but resolute. Better your blade than Bothaya's slow torment, her eyes seemed to say. Steel flashed. The scholar's hand shook, but it was their own thigh the dagger plunged into, a wound deep enough to bleed, to hurt, but not to kill. Bothaya's laughter boomed like thunder. You defy me even now. Very well. The pit yawned wider, flames licking at the edges. But remember this lesson. In my service, every refusal is still a choice. And choices have consequences. The warriors vanished spared, but not saved. Bothaya's voice followed the scholar as they limped from the arena, the wound in their leg, a dull echo of the one in their chest. You'll return, the prince murmured. They always do, and the terrible truth. The scholar knew it wasn't a threat, it was a prophecy, because some debts couldn't be outrun, only paid in blood, sooner or later. The dagger stayed tucked in their belt, its weight a reminder. Next time, they might not have the luxury of half measures. Bothaya's lessons were cruel, but they stuck. And this one had carved itself into the scholar's bones. The crystalline spires of Jiggalag's fortress rose from the ashen wastes like a frozen explosion, sharp, perfect, and radiating an unbearable clarity. Every angle was exact, every plane flawless, as if the very concept of chaos had been chiseled away from existence. The scholar's breath misted in the air, their reflection splintered across 1,000 mirrored surfaces, each version of themselves staring back with silent accusation. At the heart of this geometric nightmare stood Jigalag himself, a being of pure, unyielding logic, his form shifting between night and monolith, his voice the sound of equations solving themselves. "You seek the last truth," he intoned, "but truth is structure. To know all is to become order's instrument." A pedestal materialized before them, bearing a book bound in silver filaments, its pages humming with the weight of every event, every choice, every possible future laid bare. Absolute knowledge. The scholar's fingers hovered over it, trembling not from fear, but from the gravity of the offer. To accept meant power beyond mortal comprehension, but also the erosion of will. Jigalag's harbingers didn't act, they fulfilled, their minds reduced to gears in his grand design. The scholar recoiled. No, the word echoed through the fortress, fracturing the silence like a hammer to glass. Knowledge without choice isn't wisdom, it's slavery. For the first time, Jigalag's immaculate facade wavered, a hairline crack splitting the air, a flawed conclusion. His voice grew colder, sharper. Chaos is error. To refuse order is to embrace annihilation. The scholar didn't argue. They slammed the book shut, and with a roar torn from some deep, defiant place, shattered its spine against the pedestal. Lightning without sound, a scream without voice. The fortress shuddered, its perfect geometry collapsing inward as the Daedric Princes' laughter coiled through the ruins. Not as separate entities now, but a chorus, a warning etched into the crumbling walls. You walk away today, little keeper of secrets. But the dark knows your name, and it remembers. The ground gave way. The scholar fell not into darkness, but into the ordinary, aching weight of the mortal world, the taste of burnt parchment still on their tongue. The prince's game was over, or so they prayed, because the real horror wasn't what they'd learned. It was the creeping suspicion that shattered tome or not, some truths couldn't be unlearned. And Jigalag, unlike his brethren, had infinite patience. Order always waited. The scholar touched their chest, half expecting to feel the cold symmetry of crystal beneath their skin. The scar wasn't visible, but it was there. The scholar's hands trembled as they dipped the quill into the inkwell, its surface black as the void between stars. What spilled onto the parchment wasn't words, not at first. The ink writhed like a living thing, forming symbols no mortal tongue could pronounce, letters that burned away the paper as soon as they were written. Every truth they'd gathered, every horror they'd witnessed in the realms of the Daedric Princes, dissolved into smoke before it could be pinned down. The candlelight flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to whisper. Some knowledge refuses to be caged. A gust of wind tore through the study, though the windows were latched shut. Pages fluttered like panicked birds, and in the chaos, the scholar caught glimpses of their own reflection in the ink's dark pool. Their eyes were different now. One pupil held the shifting colors of Apocrypha's endless library, the other the smoldering gold of a Dremora's gaze. The princes had left their marks in ways no simple scar could show. With a ragged breath, the scholar wiped the ruined parchment aside and reached for a fresh sheet. This time, they didn't write of realms or rituals. Instead, they sketched a single crow perched atop a crescent moon, a rose with thorns that spelled "remember" in Daedric script. The ink obeyed for now, a warning in symbols, not sentences, because the truest secrets weren't in words, but in the spaces between them. Somewhere beyond mortal perception, the princes stirred. Jigaleg's crystalline towers shuddered at the disruption. Sheogorath cackled around a mouthful of exploding cheese, and Mephala, ever the weaver, plucked a single thread from her tapestry, the one that glistened with the scholar's defiance. The game wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. The scholar leaned back, exhaustion weighing their bones, yet a strange lightness humming beneath their skin. They danced with gods and survived, though survival might not be the right word. Fractured, yes, but fractures let in light, and as they turned to the next blank page, a thought struck them, sharp as Malag Bal's chains, sweet as Sanguine's wine. The Daedric Princes weren't the only ones who could play with secrets. Quill met parchment once more. This time, they didn't write. They invited. A single drop of their own blood fell onto the page, spreading like roots through paper. Let the princes watch. Let them wonder. The scholar had learned the oldest rule of all. To unravel a god's game, you didn't break the rules. You made your own. And somewhere, in the hollows of oblivion, a door that had never existed before creaked open.